The sledgehammer crashed through the final section of concrete, sending chunks flying across the backyard. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow, not knowing that his nightmare neighbor Karen was already dialing code enforcement, about to make the biggest mistake of her vindictive life. What she didn't realize was that her own property harbored secrets that would bring her entire world crashing down. Sometimes karma doesn't just knock on your door, it kicks it in with steel-toed boots. The sledgehammer felt heavier with each swing, but Marcus Chen pressed on, his muscles screaming in protest as he brought it down on the crumbling concrete edge of what used to be his backyard pool. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool October morning, mixing with the dust that coated everything within a 20-foot radius of the demolition site. Just a few more pieces, he muttered to himself, pausing to catch his breath and survey the progress. What had once been a pristine kidney-shaped pool, the centerpiece of countless summer barbecues and his daughter's birthday parties, now resembled a concrete graveyard. Jagged chunks of gunite and broken tile created a moonscape in his once manicured yard. The decision hadn't been easy. After Sarah's accident last summer, when she'd slipped on the wet concrete and broken her ankle in 2 places, insurance had skyrocketed to nearly $3,000 a year. Combined with the constant maintenance, chemical costs, and the fact that neither he nor his wife Lisa actually swam anymore, keeping the pool had become a financial and emotional burden they couldn't bear. Marcus hefted the sledgehammer again, focusing on a stubborn section near what used to be the shallow end. The concrete here was thicker, reinforced with rebar that caught the morning sunlight like metal veins. 3 solid hits, and finally, crack. The sound of splitting concrete echoed across the suburban neighborhood, followed by the satisfying thud of debris hitting the bottom of the dumpster he'd rented. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through the morning air, like a rusty blade. Marcus didn't need to turn around to know who was shrieking at him from across the fence. Karen Whitmore had been the bane of his existence since she'd moved in next door 3 years ago, turning what had been a peaceful retirement into a constant battle over property lines, noise ordinances, and homeowner association violations that existed only in her imagination. He set the sledgehammer down carefully and turned to face her. Karen stood at the fence line, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair somehow immune to the morning humidity, wearing a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Her face was flushed with indignation, and her manicured nails gripped the fence posts so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. "Good morning to you too, Karen," Marcus said, keeping his voice level despite the anger that automatically bubbled up whenever he saw her face. "I'm demolishing my pool, as you can clearly see. At 7:30 in the morning? On a Saturday. This is completely unacceptable." Karen's voice pitched higher with each word. "Some of us value our sleep and our property values. Do you have any idea what this destruction is doing to the neighborhood?" Marcus glanced at his watch. 7:45, actually, and he deliberately waited until after the city's noise ordinance window opened at 7:30. He'd learned to be precise about these things when dealing with Karen, who had a talent for finding violations where none existed and a speed-dial relationship with every city department that would listen to her complaints. "The city allows construction noise starting at 7:30 on weekends," he replied calmly. "I checked. And it's my property, Karen. I can do what I want with it as long as I follow the proper procedures." "Proper procedures?" Karen's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You mean like pulling permits? Because I don't see any permit signs posted, Marcus. And I know for a fact that any major demolition requires city approval." This was where Karen's obsessive attention to city codes usually tripped him up, but Marcus had done his homework this time. After years of her complaints about everything, from his fence height to the color of his mailbox, he'd learned to document everything meticulously. Pool demolition on private property doesn't require a permit unless you're altering the drainage or connecting to city utilities, he said, pulling his phone from his pocket and scrolling to the screenshot he'd taken of the relevant city code. Section 14.2.7 of the Municipal Building Code. "I checked with the city planning office twice to be sure." The confident look on Karen's face flickered for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Well, we'll just see about that. I'm sure you're violating something. The noise, the dust, the debris. There has to be a code against turning your property into a disaster zone." "The dumpster has a valid permit," Marcus continued, anticipating her next complaint. "The demolition is being done by hand to avoid heavy machinery noise, and I've watered down the work area twice to minimize dust." I'm following every regulation to the letter. Karen's eyes narrowed. He could practically see the gears turning in her head, searching for another angle of attack. This was a pattern. Find a complaint, escalate it to the authorities, then sit back and watch her neighbors deal with the bureaucratic nightmare she'd unleashed. She'd done it to the Johnsons over their vegetable garden, to elderly Mr. Peterson, about his bird feeders, and to the young couple with a newborn over their excessive outdoor lighting. We'll see about that, she repeated, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I'm calling code enforcement right now, and the noise complaint line, and the Environmental Protection Office about all that dust. You think you can just destroy property values in this neighborhood without consequences? Think again. She spun on her designer sneakers and stalked toward her house, already pulling her phone from her tracksuit pocket. Marcus watched her go, feeling the familiar mixture of frustration and resignation that came with any Karen encounter. He'd thought he'd covered all his bases this time, but somehow she always managed to find a way to make his life miserable. Lisa appeared at the back door, holding 2 cups of coffee. Her graying hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore the old University of Texas t-shirt she'd claimed as her weekend uniform since retiring from teaching last year. Let me guess, she said, handing him one of the cups. Karen's filing a complaint. 3 complaints, apparently. Marcus took a grateful sip of the coffee, feeling the caffeine hit his system. Noise, dust, and property values. The holy trinity of Karen grievances. You did check all the regulations, right? Lisa's voice carried just a hint of concern. They'd learned the hard way that Karen's complaints, however frivolous they seemed, could still result in expensive city inspections and bureaucratic headaches. Every single one. Twice. Marcus gestured toward the demolished pool. This is completely legal. Pool demolition, private property, no permits required. All noise and dust regulations followed to the letter. She's fishing. She always is. Lisa surveyed the destruction with a mixture of sadness and relief. God, I'm going to miss it though. Remember Sarah's 8th birthday party? She must have had 15 kids in there, and they screamed and splashed. 4 hours. And you made that elaborate mermaid cake that looked like it was floating on the water. Marcus smiled at the memory, then his expression grew more serious. But we made the right choice. After the accident, after what happened to the Hendersons with their lawsuit when that kid got hurt in their pool. We can't take the liability anymore. Lisa nodded, but he could see the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. The pool had been their dream when they'd bought the house 15 years ago. They'd saved for 2 years to afford it, had planned it down to the last tile, had imagined decades of family gatherings and summer evenings floating under the stars. But dreams had a way of becoming burdens, and sometimes the right choice was the hardest one to make. How much more do you have left? Lisa asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. Maybe 2 hours of breaking up concrete, then the rest is just hauling debris to the dumpster. The hard part's mostly done. Marcus looked at the remaining chunks of concrete and tile. I should be finished by noon, well before the weekend noise restrictions kick in at 6. Perfect. I'll make lunch for when you're done. Something substantial. You've been working since 6 this morning. Thanks. Honey. The sound of a car door slamming cut him off, followed by the unmistakable rumble of a diesel engine. Marcus turned toward the street and felt his heart sink. A white city pickup truck was parked at the curb, its official seal clearly visible on the door. A man in a khaki uniform was walking up Karen's driveway, clipboard in hand. Well, that was fast, Lisa said dryly. Even for Karen. The code enforcement officer was a thin man in his 50s with a grey mustache and the patient, slightly weary expression of someone who dealt with his share of neighborhood disputes. Marcus had seen him before, Jim something, he thought, during Karen's complaint about the Johnsons' garden fence height. Marcus watched as Karen emerged from her house, gesturing dramatically toward his yard while speaking rapidly to the officer. Even from a distance, he could see her pointing at the demolished pool, the dumpster, and what appeared to be every surface that had accumulated concrete dust. The officer nodded ochre. 3 hours later, Marcus was loading the last wheelbarrow of concrete chunks into the dumpster when he noticed the white city truck had returned. This time, Jim Rodriguez wasn't alone. A second officer, a younger woman with short auburn hair, and the kind of intense focus that suggested she took her job very seriously, was walking the perimeter of Karen's property with a measuring tape. "Lisa." Marcus called toward the house. "You might want to see this." His wife emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What now? Please tell me Karen didn't call in the National Guard." "Look." Marcus nodded toward the neighboring yard, where both officers were now examining the side of Karen's house with obvious interest. Jim was taking photographs while his partner, her nameplate read Inspector Martinez, was making detailed notes and measurements. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered. "Are they actually inspecting her property?" The irony wasn't lost on either of them. For 3 years, Karen had weaponized the city's inspection process against every neighbor within a 2-block radius. She'd filed complaints about fence heights, mailbox colors, garden plantings, holiday decorations, and even the type of outdoor lighting people used. Most of the complaints were frivolous, but they still required official responses, wasted city resources, and caused stress and expense for the families targeted. Now, it appeared, the tables had turned. Marcus couldn't hear what the inspectors were saying, but their body language told the story. Inspector Martinez was shaking her head while pointing at something along Karen's roofline. Jim was photographing what appeared to be the foundation line where Karen's house met her property line. Both officers moved with the methodical precision of people who had found exactly what they were looking for. "Should we go inside?" Lisa asked. "This feels like watching someone's life fall apart." Before Marcus could answer, Karen's front door flew open. She strode out onto her porch wearing a different outfit, a crisp white blouse and navy slacks that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager," and her expression was pure outrage. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying across both yards. "What exactly are you doing on my property without my permission?" Jim looked up from his camera. "Mrs. Whitmore, we are conducting a routine follow-up inspection based on some discrepancies we noticed during our earlier visit." "Discrepancies? What discrepancies?" "I called you about his property." She jabbed a finger toward Marcus, "Not mine." Inspector Martinez straightened up from her measuring tape and walked over to where Karen stood. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that the younger woman's expression was all business. "During our initial response to your complaint, we observed what appears to be an unpermitted addition to your residence. City Code requires us to investigate any potential violations we observe during official visits, regardless of the original complaint." Karen's face went through a fascinating series of color changes, from red to white to an alarming shade of purple. "Addition? What addition? I haven't made any additions to my house." Martinez consulted her clipboard. "The sunroom on the east side of your residence. According to city records, no permits were pulled for that construction, and our preliminary measurements suggest it may violate several code requirements." "That's not an addition." Karen's voice cracked with desperation. "That's a seasonal room. A temporary structure. Those don't require permits." "Any structure with a permanent foundation, electrical connections, and plumbing requires permits and inspections. This appears to have all three." Marcus felt Lisa's hand slip into his. They both remembered when Karen had built her seasonal room 6 months ago. The construction had taken 3 weeks, involved a concrete foundation, and required connecting to both the electrical grid and the home's plumbing system. The sound of jackhammers, concrete mixers, and nail guns had echoed through the neighborhood. From dawn to dusk, conveniently ignoring the same noise ordinances Karen was so quick to enforce on others. At the time, Marcus had wondered about permits, but he'd been dealing with his own problems: Sarah's recovery from her broken ankle, Lisa's retirement transition, and the mounting costs of pool maintenance. He'd assumed Karen, with her obsessive attention to city codes, would naturally have pulled all the required permits. Apparently, that assumption had been wrong. "I want to see your supervisor," Karen demanded, pulling out her phone. "This is harassment, plain and simple. You're retaliating against me for filing a legitimate complaint about my neighbor." Jim stepped forward, his expression patient but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand you're upset, but this isn't retaliation. When we respond to any complaint, we are required to report any code violations we observe, regardless of the property where we find them. It's standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" Karen's laugh was shrill and desperate. "In 3 years of filing complaints about this neighborhood, No one has ever randomly inspected my property during someone else's investigation. That's because, Martina said quietly, in 3 years of responding to your complaints, we've never had reason to look closely at your property. Your sunroom is visible from the street and clearly violates setback requirements. Once we noticed that, we had to investigate further. Karen's phone was already at her ear. Yes, I need to speak to someone in charge immediately. Your inspectors are harassing a tax-paying citizen who was simply trying to report violations in her neighborhood. While Karen ranted into her phone, pacing back and forth on her porch like a caged animal, the two inspectors continued their methodical documentation. Marcus watched, fascinated, as they measured distances, photographed angles, and consulted what appeared to be official building plans on Martinez's tablet. You know what the really crazy part is? Lisa said softly. She probably could have gotten permits for that sunroom if she'd just applied for them. It's not like it's some massive violation of neighborhood character or anything. Marcus nodded. The sunroom itself was actually quite attractive, professionally designed and built with quality materials. But Karen's obsession with controlling everyone else's compliance with city codes had apparently blinded her to her own violations. The setback issue is probably the big problem, he said, studying the addition's proximity to the property line. Looks like it's maybe 3 feet from the fence. Isn't the minimum setback requirement 5 feet for permanent structures? In residential zones, yes. The voice came from behind them. They turned to see their neighbor from the other side, Tom Harrison, leaning against their shared fence. Tom was a retired contractor who'd built half the custom homes in their subdivision, and his knowledge of building codes was encyclopedic. How long have you been watching this? Lisa asked. Since the circus started, Tom grinned. And brother, this is better entertainment than cable TV. That sunroom is at least 2 feet inside the required setback, probably doesn't have proper foundation permits, and I'd bet money the electrical work wasn't inspected. Plus, look at the roofline. Marcus squinted at Karen's addition. What about it? See how it extends above the original house profile? That changes the overall structure height, which triggers a whole different set of requirements. Drainage, wind load calculations, fire safety clearances, the works. As if summoned by Tom's assessment, Inspector Martinez walked over to their fence line. Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm Inspector Martinez with the city. Mind if I ask you a few questions about the construction timeline for that addition? Not at all, Tom replied. I'm Tom Harrison, retired contractor. What do you need to know? When was the construction completed? About 6 months ago. Took maybe 3 weeks total. Professional crew, good work quality, but I remember thinking it was odd that I never saw any permit postings or inspection stickers. Martinez made notes. Did you observe foundation work? Oh yeah. They dug a full foundation, poured concrete, the whole 9 yards. Had to connect to the main house plumbing for a wet bar and half bath. Electrical work too. I saw them running. New lines from the main panel. Each detail Tom provided seemed to make Martinez's pen move faster across her clipboard. Marcus realized he was witnessing something rare. Karen Whitmore, the neighborhood's self-appointed code enforcement vigilante, being hoisted by her own petard. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Your observations are very helpful. As Martinez walked back toward Jim, Karen ended her phone call and stalked across a yard to intercept the inspector. I spoke to your supervisor, she announced loudly. He assured me that this fishing expedition will be reviewed by the department head. You can't just randomly harass citizens who are trying to help maintain neighborhood standards. Mrs. Whitmore, Jim said calmly, your supervisor confirmed that our actions are within standard operating procedures. When we observe potential violations during any official visit, we are required to investigate. No exceptions. This is about revenge, isn't it? Karen's voice was getting higher and more desperate. Because I've filed complaints about other properties in this neighborhood, you're trying to intimidate me into staying quiet. Martinez looked up from her clipboard. Our job is to enforce city codes fairly and consistently. The violations we've documented on your property would require investigation regardless of who reported them or when they were discovered. Violations? Plural. Karen's face had go. Marcus woke up Monday morning to the sound of heavy machinery rumbling down his street. Through the bedroom window, he could see a massive crane truck positioning itself in front of Karen's house, its yellow boom extending toward her roofline. Like a mechanical finger of doom. "Lisa, you need to see this," he called out, pulling on his robe. By the time they both made it to the front window, the scene outside had transformed into a full-scale construction operation. The crane was joined by 2 pickup trucks, a flatbed trailer loaded with lumber, and at least 6 workers in hard hats. A man in a suit was directing the operation while consulting what appeared to be architectural drawings. "My God," Lisa breathed. "What is she doing?" Their question was answered when Karen emerged from her house, marching directly toward the work crew with the determined stride of a general heading into battle. She wore a business suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and her hair was pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like she was ready to fire someone. "I want that entire edition removed by end of business today," she announced loudly enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "I don't care what it costs. I want it gone before those city inspectors come back." The man in the suit, presumably the contractor, looked up from his drawings with obvious concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, we discussed this on the phone. Removing a structure this size safely takes time. We need to disconnect utilities, obtain demolition permits, and I don't want to hear about permits." Karen's voice cracked with desperation. "The whole problem is permits. Just tear it down." "We can't legally demolish any structure without proper permits and utility disconnections. That addition has electrical and plumbing connections. That need to be professionally isolated before, then do that first. But I want it gone today." Marcus and Lisa exchanged glances. Karen's plan was becoming clear, and it was both desperate and potentially catastrophic. Rather than face the lengthy permit process and potential fines, she was trying to eliminate the evidence of her violations by destroying the sunroom entirely. "She's lost her mind," Lisa said quietly. "Completely." Marcus watched as Karen continued, berating the contractor, who was clearly regretting taking this job. "But there's no way they're going to be able to remove that thing in one day. It took 3 weeks to build." Tom Harrison's voice drifted over from his yard. "More like 3 days minimum, and that's if everything goes perfectly." He was standing at his fence, coffee mug in hand, watching the chaos with professional interest. You can't just tear into a structure like that without knowing what's load-bearing. Plus, they'll need to cap the utilities, remove the foundation, and restore the drainage. This is going to be a disaster. As if summoned by Tom's prediction, a white city truck pulled up behind the construction vehicles. Jim Rodriguez climbed out, followed by Inspector Martinez and a third official Marcus didn't recognize, an older woman with silver hair and the kind of authority that suggested she was someone's supervisor. "Oh, this is getting good," Tom murmured. Karen spotted the officials immediately and rushed toward them, her heels clicking against the asphalt like machine gun fire. "You're too late," she called out triumphantly. "I'm removing the addition voluntarily. Problem solved." Jim Rodriguez consulted his clipboard while the silver-haired woman surveyed the construction scene with obvious displeasure. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Chief Inspector Williams. We need to discuss several issues regarding your property." "There are no issues," Karen replied, her voice tight with forced confidence. "I'm removing the unpermitted structure. End of story." "I'm afraid it's not that simple." Chief Inspector Williams gestured toward the work crew. "Demolition of any structure requires permits, just like construction. You can't simply tear down a building without following proper procedures." The color drained from Karen's face. But you said it was unpermitted. You said it violated codes. I'm fixing the problem." "The violations need to be addressed through the proper legal channels," Martinez explained. "That means applying for after-the-fact permits, scheduling inspections, and either bringing the structure into compliance or obtaining a demolition permit. You can't skip the process just because you own the property." Karen's contractor chose that moment to approach the group. "Excuse me," he said to Chief Inspector Williams, "but I need to halt work until we get this sorted out. My company can't proceed with unpermitted demolition." "Absolutely correct," Williams replied. "All work must stop immediately until proper permits are obtained." "No." Karen's composure finally cracked completely. "You can't do this to me. First you harass me for building without permits, Now you're harassing me for trying to fix it. This is targeted persecution." "Mrs. Whitmore," Williams said calmly, "the city doesn't persecute anyone. We enforce codes consistently and fairly. You built without permits, which is a violation. Now you're attempting to demolish without permits, which is another violation. The solution isn't to ignore the process, it's to follow it correctly." Marcus found himself feeling genuinely sorry for Karen, even after 3 years of her harassment. She looked like a woman who had bet everything on a single desperate gamble and was watching it fall apart in real time. What do I need to do?" Karen's voice was small and defeated. Martinez consulted her tablet. "First, you need to stop all demolition work immediately. Then you need to apply for after-the-fact permits for the original construction. Those applications will trigger inspections to determine whether the structure can be brought into compliance with current codes. And if it can't, then you apply for a demolition permit and follow the proper removal procedures. But that's a separate process with its own requirements and timeline." Karen sank down onto her front steps, her expensive suit wrinkled and her perfect hair beginning to escape its severe bun. For the first time since Marcus had known her, she looked genuinely vulnerable. "How long?" she asked quietly. "The permit application process typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, Williams replied. "Inspections and compliance determination could add another month. If demolition is required, that's another permit process, maybe 10 to 12 weeks total." 3 months, Karen whispered. "You're telling me I have to live with this sword hanging over my head for 3 months. Mrs. Whitmore, you created this situation by building without permits. The city can't waive its procedures just because following them is inconvenient for you." Marcus watched as the full weight of Karen's situation finally hit her. For 3 years, she'd wielded the city's bureaucracy like a weapon against her neighbors, never considering that the same system could be turned against her. Now she was trapped in the very web of regulations and procedures she'd used to torment others. The contractor was already directing his crew to pack up their equipment. The crane's booms slowly retracted, and the workers loaded their tools back onto the trucks with the efficiency of people who dealt with permit problems before. "Wait." Karen jumped up from the steps. "Can't we work something out? I'll pay double. Your usual rate. Triple." The contractor shook his head. "No amount of money is worth risking my company's license. We can't do unpermitted work, period. Call us when you get your demolition permit approved." As the construction convoy departed, leaving Karen standing alone in her driveway surrounded by the detritus of her failed emergency demolition, Marcus felt the complex satisfaction of watching justice served. But he also felt something else, a growing uneasiness about what Karen might do next. Because if there was one thing he'd learned about his neighbor over the past 3 years, it was that she didn't handle being cornered gracefully. She fought back, and she fought dirty. The proof came 2 hours later, when Lisa answered the doorbell to find a man in an expensive suit holding an official-looking folder. "Mrs. Chen, I'm attorney Bradley Morrison. I represent your neighbor, Mrs. Karen Whitmore. I'm here to serve you with notice of a civil lawsuit regarding property damage, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Lisa's face went pale as she accepted the papers. "Property damage? What property damage?" "According to my client, your husband's demolition activities have caused structural damage to her foundation through ground vibration, contaminated her property with concrete dust, and created a dangerous condition that has substantially diminished her property value. We are seeking damages in the amount of $50,000, plus legal fees and injunctive relief to halt all further demolition activities." Marcus appeared behind Lisa, having heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. "This is ridiculous. My demolition was completely legal and properly conducted." "That will be for the court to decide, Mr. Chen. You'll need to respond to this complaint within 20 days or face default judgment. Good day." As the attorney walked back to his BMW, Marcus felt the ground shift beneath his feet in a way that had nothing to do with pool demolition. Karen had just escalated their conflict from a neighborhood dispute to a legal war, and he had no idea how devastating the battlefield was about to become. But Karen, watching from her window with the first genuine smile she'd worn in days, was about to learn that sometimes when you go nuclear, the fallout doesn't blow the direction you expected. The law office of Patterson and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown high-rise, and Marcus had never felt more out of place in his life. Sitting across from attorney David Patterson, a sharp-eyed man in his 40s who specialized in civil litigation, Marcus tried to process the stack of legal documents spread across the mahogany conference table. $50,000, he said for the third time, as if repetition might make the number less terrifying. She's actually suing us for $50,000 because I demolished my own pool. The amount is largely irrelevant, Patterson replied, scanning through Karen's complaint with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variety of frivolous lawsuit. What matters is that she's made specific claims that we can either prove or disprove. Property damage, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. These aren't automatic wins for her. She has to prove actual damages. Lisa shifted nervously in her chair. But defending against this is going to cost us a fortune, isn't it? Even if we win. Legal defense is expensive, Patterson admitted. But here's the thing about lawsuits like this. They cut both ways. If we can prove Mrs. Whitmore filed this suit in bad faith, we can countersue for our legal fees and damages. And based on what you've told me about her history of complaints and harassment, she may have just given us the ammunition we need. Marcus felt a spark of hope. What do you mean? In civil litigation, both sides have the right to discovery, the legal process of demanding relevant documents, records, and testimony from the opposing party. Mrs. Whitmore opened that door when she filed this lawsuit. Now we get to look at everything: her complaint history, her property records, her communications with city officials, even her financial records if they're relevant to her damage claims. Patterson pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Tell me everything you can remember about her complaint patterns over the past 3 years. Dates, targets, outcomes, everything. For the next hour, Marcus and Lisa recounted Karen's reign of terror over their neighborhood. The complaints about the Johnsons' vegetable garden that resulted in a $2,000 fine for unapproved landscaping modifications. The harassment of elderly Mr. Peterson over his bird feeders that led to a citation for attracting nuisance wildlife. The young couple with a newborn who received violations for excessive outdoor lighting that turned out to be a single motion sensor security light. She's been systematically targeting everyone in the neighborhood, Lisa concluded. It's like she appointed herself the unofficial code enforcement officer. Patterson's pen moved rapidly across his legal pad. This is exactly what I was hoping to hear. A pattern of harassment disguised as civic duty. We are going to subpoena every complaint she's filed with the city over the past 5 years, along with all her communications with city officials. Is that legal? Marcus asked. Absolutely. She made her relationship with city enforcement a central part of her case by claiming you were somehow given preferential treatment. That opens the door to examining her entire history with the department. Patterson smiled grimly. She may have just handed us the keys to her own downfall. 3 weeks later, Marcus was sitting in Patterson's office again, but this time the attorney's expression was one of barely contained amazement. I've been practicing law for 20 years, Patterson said, gesturing at the boxes of documents stacked around his office, and I have never seen anything quite like this. He pulled out a thick folder labeled Whitmore Complaint History and opened it on his desk. Karen Whitmore has filed 237 complaints with various city departments over the past 5 years. 237. The average citizen files maybe 1 or 2 complaints in their entire lifetime. Marcus stared at the folder. 237 complaints. Everything from noise violations to landscaping infractions to mailbox placement disputes. She's filed complaints against 68 different properties in a 12-block radius around her house. Some families have been targeted multiple times. Patterson pulled out another document. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember that building permit issue with her sunroom? Turns out it's not her first unpermitted construction project. He spread several photographs across the desk. These are satellite images from the county assessor's office, taken over the past 8 years. Look at this progression. Marcus studied the images, which showed Karen's property from above across different time periods. Is that a shed? Not just any shed. A 12 by 16 structure with electrical connections, built 7 years ago without permits. Then, there's this pergola, Patterson pointed to another image, built 5 years ago, also unpermitted. And this deck extension from 3 years ago. She's been building without permits for years, Lisa breathed. It gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. Patterson pulled out a thick stack of email printouts. These are her communications with the Code Enforcement Department. Look at this exchange from last year. He handed Marcus an email chain where Karen was arguing with Jim Rodriguez about a neighbor's fence height. In her messages, she repeatedly referenced her professional relationship with the department and suggested that her extensive knowledge of code enforcement procedures should be given special consideration. She actually wrote that she deserves priority status for her complaints because she's helped the city identify so many violations, Patterson said. She literally viewed herself as an unofficial city employee. Marcus felt his anger building as he read through Karen's emails. The arrogance, the entitlement, the complete lack of self-awareness, it was all there in black and white. But wait, Patterson continued, there's more. The city's internal communications about her complaints are illuminating. He handed over another set of documents. These were emails between various city officials, and Marcus could hardly believe what he was reading. Mrs. Whitmore's 14th complaint this month, he read aloud. Department consensus is that she's using the complaint process to harass neighbors rather than address legitimate issues. Look at this one, Lisa said, pointing to an email from Chief Inspector Williams. Recommend requiring Mrs. Whitmore to provide photographic evidence for all future complaints due to pattern of frivolous filings. Patterson nodded. The city has been documenting her abuse of the system for years. They just couldn't do anything about it because filing complaints, even frivolous ones, isn't technically illegal. But when she filed this lawsuit, she made all of this discoverable. So what does this mean for our case? Marcus asked. It means we are not just defending against her lawsuit, we are going on the offensive. Patterson pulled out a draft document labeled counterclaim. We are suing her for abuse of process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and creating a public nuisance through her harassment campaign. And we are not just seeking our legal fees back, we are seeking damages for every family in the neighborhood she's targeted. Marcus stared at the counterclaim. You mean, we are turning this into a class action lawsuit? Exactly. I've already contacted several of your neighbors, and they are eager to join. The Johnsons, Mr. Peterson, the young couple with a baby, everyone she's harassed over the years. We are going to document the full scope of her campaign and seek compensation for all her victims. Lisa looked overwhelmed. But what about her original lawsuit against us? Based on the evidence we've gathered, I'm confident we can get her claims dismissed entirely. The city's own records prove that your pool demolition was completely legal and properly conducted. Her claims of property damage are contradicted by the official inspection reports. As for emotional distress, Patterson smiled grimly. It's going to be hard for her to claim you harassed her when she's the one with a documented history of harassing everyone else. Marcus felt a weight lifting from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized was there. For weeks, he'd been living with the fear that Karen's lawsuit might actually succeed, that her vindictive lies might somehow prevail in court. When do we file the counterclaim? He asked. Tomorrow, along with a motion to dismiss her original complaint and a request for sanctions against her attorney for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Patterson began gathering the documents. By the time we are done, Karen Whitmore is going to wish she'd never heard of the legal system. As Marcus and Lisa left the law office, walking hand in hand toward their car, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years of dealing with Karen: genuine optimism. The woman who had weaponized bureaucracy against her neighbors was about to face the full force of the legal system she'd tried to manipulate. But even as they drove home through their peaceful suburban neighborhood, neither of them could have imagined just how far Karen was willing to go to avoid the consequences of her actions. Because desperate people don't just fight back, sometimes they try to burn everything down rather than admit defeat. And Karen Whitmore was about to prove that she was willing to destroy her entire life rather than face the truth about what she'd become.